Hello everyone, welcome to MYP Biology by me, Basira Gassamli. Today we're going to talk about voluntary and involuntary actions. What are they? So let's get to know them. What is voluntary action? Voluntary actions is an action that is thought of and consciously performed by a person. So we cannot act voluntarily without thinking, such as walking, choosing food, what to eat, sleeping times. Those are actually voluntary actions that before we're thinking, then we just take the action. When it comes to an involuntary action, this is actually the happens unconsciously without thinking, such as sneezing or when our stomach is rumbling, and when we touch the hot pot, so directly we take our hand back. When responses to the stimuli are involuntary, it's called reflexes. So the reflex actions or reflex is an involuntary action in response to a stimulus. This is a spontaneous action without even thinking, such as when we see the bright light, we blink our eyes, or when we are getting into a dusty place, we sneeze without even, thinking about that. So those are actually the reflex actions. And you know that our decisions are made by the nervous system. So the neurotransmitters can be excitatory or inhibitory. So when the neurotransmitters are excitatory, it means that it depolarizes the voltage and the impulses sent. But when it comes to inhibitor neurotransmitters, the voltage actually becomes hyperpolarized and it blocks the impulses. For example, remember that an impulse is triggered in the postsynaptic neuron when the voltage across in the membrane reaches minus 50 or 55 millivolt. It means that impulse is sent. When it comes to inhibitor neurotransmitters, so as you know, the normal state of the neurons are the minus 70 millivolt, but if it goes down to the negative, so it becomes hyperpolarized and it blocks the impulses. Such as we can give an example of the inhibitor neurotransmitters, such as when you're sleepy at work but you want to just wake up and you drink a cup of coffee which contains caffeine. So caffeine actually works like inhibitor neurotransmitters. It hyperpolarizes the voltage and it blocks the impulses to be sent. So you for a couple of hours, you're awake and you're not sleeping. Here's a question that you're supposed to solve. It's a presynaptic neurons labeled A, B, and C release neurotransmitters that trigger impulses, but D releases an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Do you expect an impulse in the postsynaptic neuron if there are impulses in B, D, C, A, B, and C? So you're going to solve this one. Presynaptic neuron in which an impulse arrives at the synapse, and an impulse initiated in the postsynaptic neuron. Can past experience influence reflexes? Today we're going to talk about famous physiologist which won the Nobel Prize for his investigation on the conditioned response, Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. He was a famous physiologist who was investigating the digestion on dogs when he realized that dogs start to salivate when they see his assistant, which usually brings the food for the dogs. Then he changed this let's say trigger for the bell. So that is he put the condition that bell rings and the food comes. So before the first time there was no salivation when the dog hears the bell, but after some time dog starts to salivate even with the sound on of the bell. So dog doesn't know that whether food will come or not, but with the hearing of the sound, he realized that when the song comes, then the food will come, and he starts to salivate. So the dog's salivation to meet power is an unconditional reflex because everybody wants to eat, and this is unconditional reflex. But over time, however, the dog comes to salivate at the sounding of the tone alone. When this occurs, a conditional reflex has developed. It can happen in humans as well. For example, when you're moved to a new apartment, sometimes it can be challenging to find the light switch where it is actually located. But after a couple of times, you even without looking, just put your hand on the light switch and turn on the light without even seeing where it is. So this is actually the condition reflex that person develops. Now let's watch a video about Pavlov's classical conditioning. So then we're gonna talk about later.
Conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction, when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation. You can try this popular classroom exercise. Take a friend, sit down and relax for 2 minutes. Then allow your partner to check and record your pulse rate. Your partner will then tap a pencil on the desk 5 times. Right after, stand up and hop on one leg for 30 seconds, and then check your pulse again. Repeat the procedure 4 times, having the partner record all data. After relaxing for the 5th time, your partner will tap the pencil 5 times as usual. Now, instead of getting up for your exercise, only check your pulse. If the conditioning was successful, your pulse rate will rise even without engaging in exercise. What do you think? Does classical conditioning always work? If so, are commercials a form of mental manipulation? And should we limit advertising in public spaces?
So now you've watched the video, so let's get to the review parts. Those are the questions that you are supposed to answer. So if you cannot answer one of them, just go back to the lesson, repeat the slides, and you will definitely answer all these questions because they are pretty easy. So now, thanks for watching, guys. Have a nice day. Bye bye.